Okay, so frame 26 is where I already have my pose before the jump, and we're gonna continue with the next pose. And I would say that the next important key I have is here on frame 42, where I named the marker K. So I want to do this pose before I do the poses between. So select everything you need and press I, and I'm just gonna push some stuff to the side so I have more room. Okay, so the first thing I'm gonna do is flip back and forth using my up and down arrow. And I'm also gonna scrub between to see all the details. So basically the body leans forward a lot, the arms go back, the head is starting to look straight up, and the screen right foot is forward, and this is the first frame where the heel hits the ground as well. And the pelvis has traveled forward, but not a whole lot, it's just a little bit. So those are the main pointers I want for this pose. So let me just do that. And with this rig, when he bends forward, the back piece of the armor goes through the helmet. So what I usually do is grab the neck. You might have to go into wireframe mode and then just translate the neck back slightly until the helmet and the back piece here don't intersect each other anymore. So I also forgot to mention that my arms are in IK because that's my preferred method of animating, but it's totally valid to have them in FK if that's what you prefer. I would say that's even better for this type of animation where the arms are swinging back and forth. I just like to avoid it wherever I can because I don't like working with it. And I also changed my parent to cog so that the arms are following the center of gravity. Whenever I move this, the arms move with it. They don't stay stuck in one place. And when shaping this pose, you also want to make sure you're rounding the back. You don't keep it fully straight because you can see that here on Brian, his spine is not straight here. I'm also using these tweakers on the arm just to make that shape rounder like it is on his arm here. And you want to be careful with how much you're pushing that because the arm can look broken. So just be subtle with it. It's not going to look exactly like the reference. This foot has gone forward now, which means the pelvis also has to follow. And we can't really see the other arm behind the body, but if we scrub through here, we can see the arm goes back. We can see it here, and then it goes forward, which means it's pretty much in this position, but just a little bit more forward where it's hidden behind the body. And I think what I want to do is actually have it visible just for that silhouette. So I wanted to give the head more of a relaxed position where it's not fully pushed forward, it's slightly down, but I'm making sure the eyes are looking forward at this point. And I think this is all I need for this pose right now. So what I can do now is go back, and I have these 3 markers here and I can fill that in. So firstly, I have this pose where the body just tenses a little and he has that anticipation on his hands. And I think I want to push it 1 frame back to frame 29 because this is before the hands start traveling back. So again, key everything and start flipping. So the hands definitely go into more of a fist shape. The shoulders go up, the torso is rotating away from us, and the pelvis is going down a little. So those are the main things I'm noticing. Okay, so now I'm done with this pose, and definitely feels like there's more tension in his body, as you can see. Let's go to the next pose. So here the foot is still on the ground, but the heel is starting to lift. The body is leaning forward more, And the biggest changes on the arms, they have moved quite a lot back, so they're at least halfway to the final pose. And because the right foot is starting to lift off the ground, we know that the weight is starting to shift to the left foot. For the arms, I'm gonna use the breakdowner tool just to help me at first. And I'm gonna go around 50% to start with. But here you can see what I was talking about when I was mentioning arcs. So this key here, we marked the arc. And this is where I wanna describe how the arms get from that point A to point B. With FK animation, it would make more sense. The arms would be more straighter because they pivot from the shoulder. But in IK, they move from the wrist. So the computer is trying to find the straightest line from this point to this point, so it makes sense that it puts the breakdown here. But this is where I come into play and I tell it, no, this is not what I want. So I'm gonna grab the arm, push it back, and start changing things. Now we have moved the center of gravity forward, but it still feels like it's kind of stuck in place, so I'm gonna move it a little more. And that feels better. I think I can push this arm that's closer to us a little bit more back. So the next key I have is the key on frame 38, and I named it arms, and that's because this is pretty much the highest point the arms go. The one that's closer to us continues going up a little when the body is leaning forward, but that's mostly from the body rotation. It's not from the actual arm traveling anymore. And it's also the highest point for this far arm where we can see it behind the body, and then it starts going forward where it's hidden behind the body. So I wanted to make a key here to again feed that information into Blender. Okay, so going back and forth, interestingly enough, the pelvis area actually feels like it's frozen in place here. And obviously this is a real life reference, but I feel like that might look just a little wrong if it's fully frozen in my animation. So I might give it just a little bit of a nudge by maybe 1 pixel, just so it's not fully frozen. And again, I want to continue leaning the body forward. The foot is traveling forward as well. I feel like it's less than halfway there, like maybe 30% or 40%. The body continues leaning forward. And I think there will be even more weight on that far leg now because the foot closer to us is fully in the air. And like I said, I'm gonna continue pushing the arms back. And I'm also gonna start looking at some of these curves just so I don't forget anything, because sometimes I might forget about a specific rotation like the X rotation on the hip, and it will cause the curve to be very flat here and then move sharply. So if I remember, I'm gonna go into the graph editor and start changing that. But if I don't, then it's gonna be something that I'll have to address in Spline if I forget about it. And because this arm closer to us is higher, I'm also gonna add slight Y rotation in that direction. And I don't really fully see that in my reference, but I feel like because of that connectivity we always talk about, that doesn't hurt to add. But I also want to start easing into that on this previous frame because the arms are already going up. And I'm noticing the hands are in a pretty strong fist here, and they are getting into a fist on this frame, but then they get slightly looser on the way there. So I'm gonna loosen up those fists. And it will make this keyframe feel more powerful, if the fist starts here. And here I temporarily changed the hand to follow the chest because I'm trying to make the spine more rounder, but if I do that, you see the arm that's parented to the center of gravity stays in place and it starts stretching more, but the one that's connected to the chest follows, and it keeps the arm shape the same. It just goes a little bit higher here. So if I find later that keeping those arms in chest space is better, I'll just go back and switch it everywhere. I actually have a tool for it here. But for now, I'm gonna change it temporarily and then I'm gonna change it back to the cog space. And once I'm done, I'm changing it back to that cog space. Don't forget to save your file once in a while. And so next, I'm gonna zoom in a little to see these markers better. So next is just this far foot. And then the arc on the arms. So I'm gonna go all the way to this key pose. And this is the big stretch frame before he leaps off the ground. So that's a very important one to shape. So let me set a key and let me go back and forth. So the pelvis has moved a lot, not only forward, but also up. Obviously the screen right foot is on the toes, the other one is far forward. The body is very straight and the arms are pretty straight too and in front of the body. And we have all the information we need because we already determined where this foot lands on frame 42. So we know that this is gonna be the back foot and Max is gonna be somewhere around here. And we always want him to be roughly the same space from the reference, so the distance here wants to be the same throughout the animation, just to maintain that same spacing. Okay, so let me do that. And for a pose like this, I feel like the easiest thing to do is first zero out all these translations and rotations on the spine and neck, and maybe even the head, and even the pelvis here. So Alt R, and now he looks like a chicken. But the reason why I wanted to do this is because I don't want to start layering rotations in the other way and then maybe I'll forget about one of them, like a smaller controller, or I'll forget about the translation I had there, and then the spine is just gonna become kind of wavy and awkward. So sometimes when the pose is very different, especially on the spine, the easiest thing is just to zero it out first and work cleanly from there. Okay, and now I'm gonna start posing this new pose. And I'm pushing the body as far forward as I think it needs to go with these toes on the ground. And I'm also gonna zero out the rotation on the wrist, just so I don't get any of those gimbal locks. Or at least it'll help me avoid them as much as possible. And with this spacesuit, Max has these shoulder pads here that you can't see right now because they're going through the mesh, but they're right there. So I'm just gonna push them out of the way to sit on the arm. So something like this. This side you don't really see, so it's okay if there's a little bit of an intersection. Okay, and I think that's good enough. Even from the camera view, it doesn't look like it's really intersecting the body, so I'll just leave that. Okay, so now we have the nice straight line of action, and I also lifted the toes here a little bit to give the foot more of a curve. And I think I pushed it more than a reference. The line of action here isn't leaning as much as ours is, but that's totally fine. It might even be better to push it, and it will help him jump farther too. And then here on frame 47, between those two keys that we just made, this is the last pose where the far leg is still on the ground. And I'm also checking how far the body has traveled. I'm noticing there is an arc to the pelvis, so it's here and then it goes lower and then it goes higher again. So I want to add that arc here. The arms are also describing a nice arc. And I actually think that this is the moment where they are at their lowest on the arc when I look at the wrists. Because after this, they start going up. So that's a good thing to note. The body's starting to be more straight, especially the neck and the upper chest. And obviously the pelvis is traveling forward. And the foot that was previously on the heel is on the ground fully at this point. Even much sooner, but we're not going to be adding that until later. And the weight should also start shifting to this leg now, because the other one is about to leap off the ground. I'm also looking at the direction of those wrists and the elbow. So I'm using this controller to move the elbow around. And I'm trying to estimate how far from the body the wrist should be. I feel like it should be around here. So I can't really see that from the sideway reference, but it kind of feels right. It feels like here it's too close to the body. So we're swinging forward now, and we have one more marker here. And that's just for describing the arc on the arms. But since I already described it on frame 47, I don't really need to have another key right next to it. So I can just delete this one actually. I feel like in my sync sketch, I did this first, and then I noticed the foot leaping off the ground, so I marked that. But this serves both purposes right now. So all we need is frame 47 and we're good for now. We'll definitely need at least one more arc description, maybe around frame 50, because otherwise the arms will go straight from here to that up position. So I'm thinking maybe I'll just add a marker on frame 50, which is exactly in the middle between the other two keys. And I'm just gonna name that arc, and we can do that one instead. So the pelvis is still pretty low at this point, but it's traveling forward. I would say maybe 50%. The arms are pretty high, but they're still bent slightly. And that foot has traveled quite a lot as well. And it's also rotated upwards to almost its maximum position. The upper lean on the body is almost there as well. So those are the things I'm going to be paying attention to. And looking at the relationship between the heel and the pelvis, you can see there is a slanted line here, so the center of gravity is here. Right now mine is very far back, so we're gonna push that forward, including that lifted leg. And I'm trying to emulate this angle here on the leg too, but it's not gonna look exactly like a reference. So I'm gonna just adjust it slightly. These between poses are always harder to make look good just because there isn't a clear, strong line of action, but I feel like this is fine for now. I know that the far arm is closer to the other arm in the reference, but I think I want to have slight space there, just for visual clarity. It seems like the whole upper body is leaning this way a little. Okay, I think that's good for now. So here the next marker is a breakdown, and we already talked about doing that later after we have the next key, just so we know where exactly in space this should be. The next one after is just the arc on the arms, and here we have the next big key when Brian's feet touch the ground. So this is the one we're gonna focus on. So obviously there's a big change. The back is more rounded now. The arms are behind the body and pretty straight. The heels have touched the ground. The pelvis is lower compared to the previous pose. And this is also where I'm gonna try and see if the legs look good straight. Brian's head is looking down. And that's pretty much everything. So again, I'm gonna try and pose Max the same distance from our reference like we did before. And that gives me an idea how far he should jump. But because we gave him a sharper angle than our reference, here Brian is jumping more straight up and Max is jumping more forward, we might be able to get away with a bigger jump. So one of the first things I want to do again is just neutralize the rotations and translations on the spine, because I'm going to be moving them in the opposite direction, and I'm going to go from there. Okay, so this is what the jump looks like with the legs bent, but let's see what it would be like if the legs were more straighter. I feel like I like that better. It just feels like the impact is gonna be bigger if the legs are straight. So let's go with that. Okay, I think this is good for now. Let's look at that breakdown. And I don't have a frame that's exactly in the middle between 53 and 62, because that would be 57 and a half. So it's not gonna be exactly in the middle. And I don't wanna be guessing using my breakdowner tool. So I'm gonna grab the whole character and the previous and next key. And just for a moment, I'm gonna change them to linear extrapolation. And I'm doing this because I know that the sideways travel needs to be consistent while Max is in the air, like we talked about before with the bouncing ball. And the best way to do that is just changing to linear. So now I have basically made sure Max is traveling in a linear fashion sideways. And after I do that, I can just grab all those keys and I can change them back to constant. Now I can bring the pelvis higher. And I'm using global just to translate upwards instead of the pelvis also going forward, because my axis is going this way. And I think I'll bend the legs actually just a little, because I feel like it will work better with the arc I have. I feel like here it was too high and the arc looked a little strange. Okay, and I'm definitely dragging this leg behind a little more than the reference, but that's okay, we can exaggerate it a bit. Alright, so we have another key here, which is just for the arc, but the legs have changed a lot too. They're a lot straighter through here. And in terms of the sideways motion on the cog, I'm gonna do the same exact trick again. I'm just gonna change those keys to linear just so I don't mess anything up. And then I'm gonna switch it back to constant and just follow the reference for this pose. So another thing I'm noticing on this pose is that the shoulders are very high up, so that's something I want to incorporate, and the back is still kind of straight in terms of this angle, but it's starting to round this way. So here on the cog, I'm also paying attention to that hang time on the up and down. So the linear put me exactly in the middle, but I want to have it higher just for that bouncing ball effect. And I think I can afford to bring this pose even higher. And I had some side-to-side motion here during the jump, but I want it to be fully straight. I don't want the character to be traveling left or right because, again, while you're in the air, you have no control over your movement and you just go in a straight line. Alright, so we move on. The next part is just for the arms. And the next one, something happened here where it's both named K and arc. Oh yeah, it was two markers on top of one another. Interesting. So we're just gonna be keeping the name K because, again, this is where the pelvis goes to its lowest position and it's a big change from our previous pose. So let's make a key here. And so again, we're much lower. The whole body is kind of compact right now, very rounded back. The arms are pretty straight in front of the body. Both feet are firmly planted on the ground and the head is still looking down. And the pelvis is almost above the heels. So I'm looking at this relationship here. I had the feet land pretty far away from each other, and I think I actually want to bring them closer. So I'll just use my X location and just bring that up. So I'm also trying to drag the fingers a little. I don't really see it too much in the reference, but because it's an animation, it's nice to have some drag. And if you want the thigh angle and the lower leg angle to be more like in a reference, it does help to curve the pelvis this way on the x-axis. Okay, so let's figure out our marker on 64. Basically what changes is that he's lower now, but we still want to have that spacing on the pelvis where it's closer together up here and then it gets faster. The arms are still in the back and that's the last frame before they shoot forward, and the feet are firmly planted now. And you gotta be careful, you can't keep the pelvis too high, even with the spacing that we want to maintain, because you don't want it to feel like he lands here and then stops and then he shoots down. You still want it to feel like a continuous movement down. So even here, when looking at the angle of the legs, I do have the pelvis higher than the reference. For now, I'm gonna keep it because I'm trying to push the spacing, but if it doesn't work out, I'm just gonna bring it a little lower. And I'm also dragging the far arm behind more. Here you can see that we only see one arm and the other one is right behind it. But I don't want the body to be always twinning. Twinning is when both, let's say, arms or legs are doing the same exact motion at the same time. You want to have a little bit of offset usually. In fact, I can also exaggerate it more. And here the wrists are going this way. And I'm dragging them behind more because I'm trying to create that drag throughout. And I think I want to add another pose at around 67. And one reason is the arcs on the arms, and another is again that spacing. I really want to make it feel like there's a lot of impact on this pose. So I don't want the character to start slowing down between 64 and 69. So this pose is definitely not matching our reference as much, but I think that's okay because again, I want to be pushing everything, and when I play it, you can see that impact. So we'll see how that looks in spline. Maybe I'll have to adjust it. For now, I like it. I also decided to drag the head behind, meaning I lifted it up more compared to what we have in the reference. The back is straighter, so that's dragging behind. Far arm is more forward because in the next pose you can see that it's higher, so it's starting to catch up. Before it was dragging behind more, so there will be a bigger swing on that arm. And the arm that's closer to us is dragging behind more. I can even exaggerate that. I just don't want to be breaking the wrist too much, but this seems good. So you can see on the reference that Brian shot for us, there's a lot of twinning. The arms are always doing the same thing. The legs are different through here, but here they're always together and so on. So I wanted slightly more variation. I pushed the heel on the far leg a little bit back and I'm changing the arms. Okay, let's move on. Now here we have the arms on the marker, meaning this is where the arms are still straight in front of the body. And then here the arms start going down. This is where the foot lifts, and this is where the foot lands. The head looks up, and the foot touches the ground. Let me actually make this plane smaller now. Because it's in our way, I can't see the feet properly. And we'll change it back later. Okay, so like I said, going from this key to our next key, which I put all the way to 104, it is a little bit hard to know where the feet are gonna be because they have both moved at this point. So I'm gonna go to here where one of the feet is still planted where it was and the far foot has changed position and planted. That will give me a better idea what to do next. So frame 87 is the next one I'm gonna work on. Okay, and now that I know where that foot is gonna land, now I'm able to do the other foot landing. And this whole section at the end is like the weight shift exercise. Cool, and we have another swing and just a settle. So I'll quickly just get these two poses at the end based on the reference. So here we just want to feel like he exhales, so he gets more straighter here. There's more tension in the shoulders, and then there's an exhale and the whole body relaxes slightly. I just noticed flipping here that the foot banks sideways on this frame. So let me add that too. Let's play what we have right now. I still have a bunch of markers here that I want to address. So I have one here on 104. The arms stay pretty much locked. The leg that's closer to us plants properly and the weight shifts slightly. and the head and neck push back more. And that's pretty much it. And next I want to do this breakdown on frame 76 because I can see roughly how much the body has traveled upwards, and that would be kind of halfway but slightly higher. So the arms are still straight in front of the body before they start swinging back. The feet are still firmly planted and the body is just traveling up and the head is still looking down. And again, I'm changing things a little and I'm adding some more drag on the head and the neck and the upper chest, so that here from the impact as he's going up, the curve is more pronounced because the neck is still trying to catch up before he straightens up completely. And then here on frame 72, I can have some ease out of the squat into the standing position. So the pelvis is gonna be pretty low and the arms are in their maximum lifted position in front of the body, because from here they start going down a little. And I noticed that the heels go slightly off the ground through here as well, just because of the body rocking forward. Here I'm just tracking the arc on the pelvis. I don't want it to feel like he's going back and forth this way. I want it to be a nice hook, like that. So he's definitely leaning more forward now than he was before, but I feel like once it's blind that might look nicer. And it's a more simplified move, which is always good. And here on 82 is the first frame where the foot lifts off the ground, but what I'm gonna do is bring that key one frame before, and I'm just gonna key the last pose before the foot lifts. So the pelvis has traveled most of the way up, the arms are more than halfway back, the head is still looking down, and the weight is definitely shifting towards the foot closer to us because he's getting ready to lift the other foot off the ground. And because this far arm was higher up, we're gonna continue dragging it, and the one closer to us is gonna be lower. And we're gonna add slight drag on those wrists. Now the shoulders will be lower because the arms are lower as well. So we're just connecting everything, making it work together. Alright, now let's do frame 97. So right now, the body is almost all the way straight and the arms are almost all the way in the front. And this is the last pose on the foot before it lifts off the ground. So that's an important thing to have in it as well. The head is looking forward at this point. And that's about it. The body is still continuing to go straighter. I'm just gonna take the breakdowner tool and I'm gonna bring the pose pretty close to the next one, maybe around 82%, 83%, just to start with. I'm not gonna just leave that because again, I don't want the computer to be taking over and make every single part of the body be 83% closer to the next pose, but it helps me to get a key on everything and just start posing. Okay, and we have one more key left. Let me key that and let's see what's happening. So again, this is where the arms are still kind of in the back, but they are starting to slowly swing forward. But they're definitely at like at least 80% or even more towards the left side of the screen. And the head has looked up almost all the way. And the body is almost as straight as the next pose. So we're definitely easing into this position on the torso. And the far foot has planted firmly on the ground. The other one is starting to shift and get ready for the lift off. And that's it. That was our last pose for the main blocking with the markers that we created. I'm sure we'll need more, especially in some of these areas where we don't have too many keys. But let's see what our animation is looking like right now. I'm actually gonna extend this floor plane first. And let's see. So at a first glance, it's looking good. I'm thinking that maybe the timing will change a little bit on the jump. I might have to make it faster, but again, we're gonna see that once we spline the shot. And I'm gonna go ahead and on frame 89 or so, I'm looking at this foot that's far from us. Yeah, around 89, the foot is now planted on the ground, so I'm just gonna be adding a key just on the foot there. I don't have to key the whole body. And I'm gonna push the toes one frame later, so there's that overlap. And I'm gonna add one more key somewhere here on this moving hold, because I have a little bit of movement on the hands. So let's add one maybe on frame 13. The body has leaned almost all the way forward at this point. The heels have lifted off the ground slightly for a moment there. And the hands are just kind of moving back and forth. So we'll see what we can do there. Okay, so I kind of played around back and forth, and looking at these hands, I just added a little something there, but I don't want it to be too much. The hand goes up, down, and up. I don't really like that. Maybe just having it more subtle there will work better. And then we have a huge gap between 104 and 115, so we definitely need to have a key there. Even if it's just an in-between. So maybe let's go to frame 109, just to fill up that space. So the arms have traveled, I would say 70% of the way. The weight has shifted like 50%. And this foot closer to us, it's kind of hard to see with the plane. It has almost planted. and the chest is more deflated before he takes a breath here. So we definitely want to show that contrast for the breath here. Okay, and I think that's pretty much everything we need for our blocking. I'm gonna pause the video here, and in the next one we can see how the spline is looking and continue from there.